doctors from the South American country will land on home soil in a few hours' time. More hands on deck will boost the country's effort to contain the deadly virus that's killed at least 86 people so far. And we cross live now to Waterkloof, where SABC news anchor reporter Chriselda Lewis is waiting for their arrival. Chriselda, we spoke earlier on to Professor Somadoda Vigeni about the ties between South Africa and Cuba and the importance thereof. So let's talk a little bit more about who we're expecting on this team and what it's supposed to do for our fight against COVID-19.
Well, that's right, Tsepiso. So more than 200 Cuban healthcare workers, as they're referred to as the Army of White Gowns, will touch down here at the Waterkloof Air Force Base at midnight in South Africa tonight to assist this country in the fight against the coronavirus. So the specialized medical brigade consists of, amongst others, your family physicians, your epidemiologists, biotechnology experts, and healthcare technology engineers. So South Africa, too, has previously sent medical supplies to that country to help tackle the COVID-19 virus. So this kind of international solidarity and show of cooperation reminds me of the words, Tsepiso, of the late Cuban leader Fidel Castro, who once said that tens of thousands of scientists and doctors in Cuba were being trained to educated to save lives. That's what he said. So it rings true at a time like this when the world needs more doctors. Cuba has already deployed 21 medical brigades with more than 1,200 health professionals to 21 other countries around the world. So the medical team that will arrive in South Africa in the early hours of this morning will be placed in 14-day quarantine here in Pretoria before being deployed to the different provinces. So in this latest show of solidarity, as you indicated, long built on, Tsepi, so you'd recall the late former president here in South Africa, Nelson Mandela, and the later Cuban leader Fidel Castro were very close ties. Cuba had actively supported South Africa's fight against apartheid. And you'd also recall that the former president, Nelson Mandela, also visited Cuba in 1991 and basically thanked Fidel Castro for his support. So now both these countries are also now showing unity at yet another common enemy, the coronavirus. And least we forget, Tsepi, so that South Africa too has sent thousands of its students for medical training in that country over the past years.
Now, as you mentioned, Chriselda, that they will be fanning out across the country. Do we know that they'll be going to perhaps the rural areas, I'd imagine, where they're most needed?
Oh, absolutely, Tsepi. So while there is no further details about exactly where they will be deployed after they have been in quarantine for 14 days here in Pretoria, I can imagine that South Africa will certainly see this kind of help as taking it to areas where it is most needed. We know that, of course, one cannot really say that there is enough of these healthcare professionals around the country. So the more we have, certainly in a much more better position we will be. And especially if you look at the kind of expertise that Cuba has. I just made emphasis now to the fact that South Africa and Cuba have long been allies politically, and also in the sense that South Africa has sought a lot of help from Cuba in training some of its medical students with the kind of expertise that they have in that country. So certainly we've seen dating back to when Cuba had assisted South Africa to fight against apartheid, that kind of international solidarity we're also seeing now with Cuba sending this military brigade, or I beg your pardon, this medical brigade to South Africa. And, South Africa having also sent some medical supplies to that particular country. So it's the kind of relationship certainly that I think will be welcomed by all those who will be here today, who we're expecting amongst the dignitaries will be the Cuban ambassador here in South Africa. And I know that there had been some speculation at this stage, Tsepi, so that after the 14-day quarantine period, President Cyril Ramaphosa is likely to officially welcome that team here in the country. So likely to be sent to areas where they're most needed, indeed.
Thank you so much, Chriselda. My colleague Chriselda Lewis, as you can see, she is there at Waterkloof Air Force Base, where that team of 200 medical experts is to arrive from Cuba midnight, she says. So she does unfortunately have a long night ahead of her. But we look at the situation now in KwaZulu.